Even the best designer is going to get thrown curveballs that make them stutter or make them second guess themselves. Clients can be very, very brutal people to work with.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Gravity Sketch Design Sync, a place to talk all things design. In this episode, we will be talking with Reid Schlegel, a New York-based industrial designer with a solid history in the design consultancy and education space. He's currently an associate director at Aruliden and previously worked at Frog and Smart Design. So, really cool. As a designer educator, Reid teaches junior year ID studio and process drawing and digital visualization at the Parsons School of Design. Reid graduated from Virginia Tech Industrial Design program and was the 2012 IDSA Student Merit Award winner. And he has a really, really cool YouTube channel where he shows a lot of really interesting content around industrial design, sketching, things that you need to know as an industrial designer in general. So make sure you check it out. Reid, welcome to Design Sync. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for inviting me.
Start with, this is a question I tend to ask people because I always find there's an interesting story behind it. So can you tell us how did you ended up becoming a designer? What was that moment that made you think that you wanted to become one?
Yeah, I think for me, it wasn't really a specific moment. It was more of just a lot of little things along the way that kind of gradually led me there. When I was a kid, my one grandfather every year for like my birthday would give me different power tools. So I had power tools and he taught me how to build things from when I was about 7 years old onward. And then my other grandfather, who passed away when I was 2, but whenever I go to my grandmother's house, he had his whole design studio above the garage. So he had all these like Sid Mead style old school marker renderings everywhere. And I never really thought about it until later, but I think that kind of seeped into my head when I was a little kid. And then my parents also just really allowed me to take art classes. Like I was doing oil painting when I was in 3rd grade and pastels and watercolor classes. And there's always either making or drawing something. So when it came time to pick a career, I thought I was going to be an architect, which is what I think most creatives gravitate towards first, because it's the most ubiquitous, or one of them. It's like graphic design, interior design, or architecture. I feel like those are the ones people usually know about. So I thought I was going to be an architect for a little while. And then I thought I was going to be a mechanical engineer, which honestly probably fits my personality a little bit better. I like having things very neat and tidy and having answers to things, and obviously design is not like that very often. But when I was at Purdue University getting a student tour, the graduate student who was giving me my student tour at the end, just for whatever reason, asked me what I wanted to do. And I was telling him, I love building things, I like drawing a lot. He goes, well, you shouldn't be looking at mechanical engineering, you should look at industrial design. And then this random guy who, I don't know who he was, and I wish I could thank him all these years later, because I was probably back in 2006, he took me all the way across campus to the industrial design building, and I saw what they're working on, and from that point forward, I changed all my applications to industrial design from mechanical engineering. And yeah, from there, the rest is kind of history.
That's awesome. So it started when you were young, basically, as any story with any creative. But yeah, it's true that industrial design tends to not be the top of mind for anyone. It's always, I want to be something else, but I don't really want to be this something else, only that, you didn't really know that industrial design existed.
Yeah, I think that's one of the nice things about social media recently, with all of its pitfalls and everything, but it's given more of a spotlight to industrial design where people, unless they were your friend or your direct colleague or your family member who's looking at your work, you would never really have someone finding it. But now you have all these crazy, different, diverse people looking at your work online where they would never have found it before. So industrial design is definitely still a pretty niche career path, but it's not as niche as it was back in 2008 when I went to college.
I still get people asking me if it's industrial engineering. It's like, I just said industrial design, not engineering. Like, why did you hear that? So your grandfather had industrial design tools and equipment and like materials. Why? Was he a designer?
He was what they call a commercial designer. So he did trade shows So he was, I don't know, he didn't go to college, but he was a hand letterer for Macy's and different like venues in New York City. And from there, he kind of worked his way up and had all these different businesses until he eventually owned his own company where he was designing and making all of the schematics and everything for Canada Dry or whoever it was, and doing all of their trade shows at, I guess, whatever was before the Javits Center in New York City, and designing World's Fair booths and things. So it wasn't exactly industrial design, but it was tangentially connected, and the sketching style was very similar, and the thought process was similar. And like I said, I never really knew him. I just kind of got to sit in his chair and see all of his things that he did. And it wasn't until years later that I realized that, oh wow, I've been drawing in a very similar style to what I saw of his when I was a little kid. So who knows if that's complete happenstance or if it was because of seeing those things, but I like to think it's somewhat connected.
Yeah, me too. I would like to think that it somehow you have it in the blood or
Yeah.
something. Great. So you ended up studying industrial design, and throughout your studies, do you happen to find yourself leaning more towards a certain type of design or something that you liked to do more than other things?
I mean, I think that's why I went into design consulting after school. Was I don't really have the specific thing I like to do. I feel like when you go to design school, there's usually a few people in your studio that have their specific niche. There's usually the fashion person, the car person, the shoe person. There's always a sneakerhead in every studio. And for me, I just like the process of designing and figuring things out. And I also really like prototyping and making things. So I just basically figured out how can I put those together, and consulting was the way in which to do that. So for me, I've spent my whole career for the last, I guess, since 2012, going on 9 years now, just figuring out how to be as flexible as possible. And that's more of my focus, is how do I become a jack of all trades for everybody, because we might have someone super specific like a sunscreen company, or it might be a giant Fortune 500 company, or it might be a tech company, or it might be a government. I've worked for all these different types of people over the years, and you have to be able to open your mindset and your toolbox and figure out how to work with them to bring their ideas to life. So for me, that's kind of the specialty I've gotten into. But I've actually been thinking about it a lot, and I would love to, whenever I do decide to go in-house somewhere, work for more of an outdoors company, just because that's what I do in my free time. So if I can combine those passions, it would be great. But who knows if or when that'll ever happen.
Yeah. Well, I mean, talking about jack of all trades, how do you define? I mean, you can define this in so many different ways, right? But how would you define this? As in, is it the way that you think, or is it the tools that you know how to use, or is it, like you making prototypes? What is it that allows you to be that flexible, or is it all?
I think, honestly, some of the best advice I got in school was you're never going to be you're a good designer, you'll never be a great designer until you learn how to embrace ambiguity. And I think that's kind of what being a jack of all trades is all about, is you don't necessarily have to be an expert at everything. You just have to go into it with a mindset of I'll figure this out, and confidence. And if you can do that in design, even the best designer is going to get thrown curveballs that make them stutter or make them second guess themselves. Clients can be very, very brutal people to work with, and they'll make you question your existence on planet Earth sometimes. So as long as you're flexible and okay with the ambiguity that comes with it, and you have a few of your skills to fall back on, it always allows you to open up and do new things. I worked with this engineer at Frog. His name is Adam Wrigley, and he's probably one of the best jack of all trades I've ever met. He can learn, build, make anything, and working with him for 4 years definitely helped me grow my toolkit of what I know how to do. And that's something that I try and teach my students at school, is you don't have to be the best at it. Just at least the more things you can do, the better off you're going to be. And that even comes down to when you're trying to get a job or something. If I can at least partially speak someone else's language for a different software, it's better than saying I've never tried it before. And if their whole company uses that one thing, that's just a specific example, but the ethos is, sorry, there's a church next door and it goes off every hour, so it's loud, I apologize. But yeah, just opening your mind, allowing yourself to know that anything you can do at some point can be put together in a different way to solve a problem on a different client or different project.
Yeah, so it's basically, it's not necessarily how good you are in using a certain tool or, you know, communicating an idea in a certain specific way. It's just being able to communicate what you have in your head and what you're proposing to the client in the best way possible, or the most exciting way possible, right?
Yeah, and I guess that also comes down to, I mean, I don't want to say that you can just be a generalist and not know anything into a very specific degree. You definitely have to have your T-level skills. So I think it was Tim Brown from IDEO that said that, but if I'm wrong, I'm sorry, everybody. But like your T-level skills are, your base of your T is industrial design, and then the top of it is everything else that balances on it. So all that stuff up there is where you can be a little more open and try things and don't have to be an expert at it. But you still have to have your expert thing to fall back on, whether that's sketching, rendering, CAD modeling, building, ideally all those things together if you're going to be an industrial designer. But you need to have something that you know you can do in your sleep in order to have the flexibility to kind of go out there and do new things. Because if everything is a little bit here and there, that's where you can kind of run into trouble sometimes, because the blocks might not fit perfectly. Whereas if you have a very good foundation, you can always put blocks on top of it. And by blocks, I mean different skills, and you'll always figure out how to make something work. Because at the end of the day, industrial designers, in my opinion, are more or less communicators than anything else. We're usually people that get brought in to help people who have never done design, at least in my consulting experience, take their ideas that have been in their head, put it on paper, and then make it real. And then we're also the ones who are usually pulling together interaction design, graphic design, business, engineering, and we're the one in the middle who is taking all that, funneling it down, synthesizing it into imagery or physical models or both, and then presenting it back out into a compelling story, which makes people get excited about it, and then move forward, go on, rinse, repeat over and over again throughout the process.
So you said something really important, that designers are communicators, and they're the ones enabling other people to essentially bring what they have in their heads out into the world. So you're enabling people to materialize their ideas in some way.
Yeah.
How do you get to do that? I mean, how do you enable people to express those ideas in a way that you can also understand them, and you can have a good communication around this idea that everybody might be shaping in a different way in their heads?
Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing about that, especially when you're working with clients or if you're working with more junior designers or people that aren't in your field, is just making it very clear and allowing yourself to be vulnerable, especially in brainstorms, when you go in and just say, you are the expert here, everything that you have in your head, doesn't matter what you've done, is valuable, and no idea is bad and no sketch is bad. As long as you can get ideas out on paper, even if I try and tend to not push this way, but you could even say, even if you have to write it out, that's fine. I don't love saying that in brainstorms, especially when you're working with very corporate type people, because then they'll just go to writing and then you'll get a paragraph and a half, which is no different than what they've probably had going on in their head the whole time. But as long as even if it's a stick figure, it doesn't matter. Just getting an idea on paper. And something else you can do, which I also tend to not to do, is draw ideas for your clients, because then they just like, oh, they're here, they can do it for me. So it's always good to say, no, we're all here, it's collaborative, this is a safe space, and just put ideas down. Nothing is stupid, nothing is bad, and the quality doesn't matter. I'll actually dumb my quality of sketching down a little bit if I'm working with people that I know don't sketch very much, because nothing's worse than like trying to learn a new sport and you get paired with the best person ever and you're like, oh crap, well, what am I even trying for? So it's always good to kind of know your audience, and if I'm trying to impress someone, it would be at the final presentation, not at the upfront when I'm working on a brainstorm with people who I've maybe never met before.
A lot of people, most people that are not designers or artists, tend to be really scared of sketching, but sketching is something natural to the human being. We've been visually representing ideas for, forever, since cavemen were representing things on walls. So it is kind of crazy that people have stopped communicating ideas that they have in their heads in a kind of like a graphical way, just because society and the education system and everything has told us that, you know, if you're not the perfect sketcher, then you shouldn't be doing it. So it's kind of like, you know, like it ends up being that only a few people in the room end up sketching, right?
Yeah, it's true. It's such a funny medium because everyone's done it, but only a few people take it past, I don't know, adolescence and take it really seriously. And it's something that I like to think everyone wants to do. I don't know if that's true or not. But yeah, it is something that I feel like there's a lot of stigma around where people are like, oh, I don't draw, or I'm not creative, I can't do that. The amount of times I hear people say, I'm not creative, it's like, yes, you are creative. It's just society's beaten it out of you, or they've convinced you that you're not good enough. And that also can be an intimidating thing when you walk into a design consulting firm, like a fancy place, and everyone's all super buttoned up and polished, and in New York City or San Francisco or Seoul or wherever you are, and your client walks in and they say, okay, draw in front of us. It's like, you want me to do what? A lot of times people don't want to do that. But at the same time, I think it's always as good to lay it out very clearly what the goal is. And the goal is for us all to get to a solution together, so no one's going to judge you here. The more you can push out of your head, the more that we can take in and synthesize, and it just makes it better for everybody overall. So it's the type of thing where even though it's scary, it's kind of your job as the design Sherpa to get people to get out of that comfort zone a little bit. And 9 times out of 10, once the ball starts rolling and Post-it notes go up, everyone kind of breaks their shells and kind of gets into it a little bit more.
I love the terminology design Sherpa.
Yeah.
I've never heard it before. Is this kind of like a normal thing, or did you just come up with it?
I don't know. I guess I use the word Sherpa a lot. I think it's just because you have to basically take your clients along an uphill journey, and it can be exhausting sometimes. So you have to be the one who's up first and prepared for everything. That way they can go up. It's a pretty analogous to be the design consultant getting someone to get to the final project as it is to be the person who does a lot of the grunt work to get some wealthy tourist to the top of Mount Everest or something.
Yeah, but once you're at the top, then it's all good. And
Yep.
I mean, that's the thing, right? Like you need to get them to that peak, right? And have you found yourself in a situation where, you know, people say I'm not creative, or you see like this super shy guy that doesn't want to sketch, but ends up being the guy that had the craziest and most amazing idea in their heads, but you just had to pull it out of them?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm trying to think of a scenario off the top of my head, but I've definitely had people that it takes a lot of coaxing to get things out of them. And a lot of this experience I'm talking about now is from my last job at Frog. We did a lot of big workshops with all kinds of organizations and companies and government organizations. And when we were doing those, you got a very large mixed bag of people. So you basically just need to be very patient. And I think that's part of what teaching was very helpful on or actually I think those workshops kind of prepared me for teaching, because I was doing those before I started working at Parsons. And it makes you not give up or get frustrated on somebody. It's just keep trying new avenues of, okay, maybe is it the medium? Is it the questions? Is it the environment? Is it like, what is it that's making this person clam up, and how can you have them open up more? Because at the end of the day, if you don't get them to open up, they might be the person who on the final presentation finally lets it all out, and then the whole project falls apart, which is the worst. So, I mean, that goes into a whole other topic of like render quality and sketch quality. Like presenting to a client, I don't like having super high fidelity renders in the mid-phase presentation, because if you do, a lot of times people are too afraid to critique your work because they think, how long did it take this person to do this? Or it's finished, or I'm not the designer, I don't know. And then they'll hold it in. And then at the end is when all of the thoughts explode and then your project blows up in your face. So I think it's better to have things be a little more vulnerable, open, and less polished. And that goes the same for sketching and brainstorming and everything too.
So where do you draw the line? Do you keep it very sketchy in the middle while having these conversations?
I think it depends. I mean, over the years, honestly, my sketching at work has gone down, where when I came out of school, I was doing a lot of brainstorm sketching, which I still do a lot of, like very quick thumbnail sketching type things. At that point in time, I was much more concerned with quality. Now I'm much more concerned with efficiency. Like, how can I get this idea out? So before it was all perfect perspective and everything. Now it's all single line drawing perspective stuff, and just throw it out, send it to my team and say, here's what we're working on. Do you understand? If not, let's get on a call. Let's figure this out. Or call during the year of COVID. Before it'd be, let's go sit at your desk and talk it through. But sketching itself now, I think it's more of like sketch CAD is what we get into, where it's very quick, snappy models and jumping right into Keyshot and getting those out really fast. And then from there, we'll take those, we'll print them out, we'll sketch on top of them and work through details, because getting large forms or masses together and like roughing it out into a place where you can really understand proportion is great in CAD. But when you start getting the details, that's where you can get into a time suck, and all of a sudden 5 hours have gone by and you've worked on the same latch, and it's like, what was I doing with myself? I could have done 17 more concepts if I'd sketched them out by hand. So that's where I like to kind of ping pong back and forth, do a little CAD, print it out, sketch on it, or put it on Sketchbook Pro and digitally sketch on it. And then go, once I do that a bunch and pin them up in your review, then I'll go start doing models with much more detail, because those detailed models could be a lot of time that's for nothing if all of a sudden your creative director or your client doesn't like some of the ideas. It's better to work smart, not hard, and figure out where to put your effort. That way you're not spending late nights every day at work.
You mentioned your creative director and your team. What composes a project within a design consultancy?
It depends on the client, where, I mean, no matter what, there's always going to be at least a director and a junior designer. It depends, honestly. I mean, if it's a very well-established client, it might just be myself and a junior designer working, where they're doing the majority of the creation of the project, but I'm doing the overseeing and leading it and saying, here's what we need to do, like, here's a few sketches, let's go think this through now, go explore for 3 days, and let's check in every day at the end of the day. Or it might be a larger team project where it's it's myself leading the project, and then I have a senior designer or two, and then maybe one or two junior designers that are all working together. And then I'm there for brainstorming, but a lot of my time is actually making sure that proposals are going out and getting that the client is happy, and making sure I'm translating all the things that they want into the project, and being on calls in the organization so I can hear what people outside of our client are hearing. That way we make sure we're not just making our client happy, because it's the worst when your client loves your work and all of a sudden, as soon as the scope opens up and their bosses or their tangential coworkers come in, they hate it, and it's like, oh wow, that came out of left field. So I've learned it's always best to get your hands in as many pots as you can within your client's organization, so you understand the perspectives of more people, or as many people as possible. So, but then there's always, for those larger projects, a creative director above me. And that person's kind of purview is over all the projects in the office. So they'll come in and I call it like swoop and poop. They'll come in, like give some knowledge and then leave again really quick. So that's my role now, where I'm still doing hands-on design, but it's significantly less than it was when I was a senior designer at the office. Now it's much more of managing my team and my client relationships and making sure that the narrative of the stories and the quality is all up to par, and make sure that all goes out, because it's my final stamp that goes on it before it leaves the office.
Yeah, which is, I mean, I think it's the most important part of it all, right? Making sure that everyone is on the same page, and you're not just creating work that is going to end up just being rejected by the
Yeah, I've had some creative directors in the past that didn't have their stuff together, or now looking back on it, I think through, wow, it probably wasn't them, it might have been the client, but who knows, that it's the worst when you get a directive, you work on it, say, scrap that, and then you do it again. It's like, when as a junior designer, it can seem like it's just this barrage of updates. So I do my best to try and keep that to a minimum with my team, just because I've been there as well, and it's not fun. So the more thorough you are, the less of that you have.
And can you be talking with the client at all times, like just talking about the ideas that you're having, or do you prefer to just have something a bit more finalized before you have these different touch points with them?
It depends on the relationship. If it's someone we work with a lot, we will have mid-phase check-ins or pre-mid-phase check-ins sometimes. It also depends on how important the project is. If it's one that's very highly visible within the organization, then it's one that they might be a little bit more neurotic about and want to have more check-ins. or if it's honestly just depends on people's personalities. That's like one of the soft skills that they don't teach you in school is understanding your client. And are they an anxious person? Are they a calm person? And then also just understanding a little more about business of when does this product have to launch? How much is it going to cost? What does this mean for the company overall? Because the more importance it has, the more chefs in the kitchen you usually get, which makes it more complicated. And then you have to understand more personalities, and then it just becomes this whole like soup of emotions and timelines and design and layers of people. And it's just something that I think only being in the industry for a while, you learn how to navigate. And to be fair, I'm still figuring it out myself. And I don't think you ever do fully figure it out because there's infinite combinations of personalities and people. So it's just another example of being okay with ambiguity and figuring stuff out as you go.
Yeah, well, people are the hardest thing, right? You will never figure all of them out.
Yeah, that's why I spend my weekends in the woods. I've had enough of five days a week talking about people and their feelings in the woods. It's just myself, and I can do whatever I want.
Yeah. So now there's a lot of teamwork, there's a lot of communication with the clients, which probably was happening in a very kind of like face-to-face way before the pandemic. How has that changed, and like what do you have to just implement to compensate?
It's a lot more phone calls where my day has probably, it used to be it started around 9:30, now it starts around 8 every morning. And we go to about 6:30 in the evening. But honestly, it's just a lot of Google Hangout calls. We do a lot of Google's work, so we use all of their platforms. Also because I think it's just generally the easiest to use. I'm not trying to like plug them or anything specifically. But we have a lot of Google Hangout calls, and we also do a lot of Google Slides, so we can have collaborative decks with our clients. So that way they can see as things are added in, and other people can be in it as well at the same time. And other than that, it's not too different because we wouldn't really have the client in the office unless it was a true like phase 0 project where we're doing all the upfront strategy of really figuring out where should this go, what are we doing, how do we want to define this? Because at Aruliden we do end up doing the whole ecosystem around things. It's not just here's this beautiful product. Sometimes it starts with what should our graphic identity be, and then it's help us name our product. And then it's what should our website and our Instagram look like? And then it goes into, well, what do our products look like? And what's the packaging look like? And all of a sudden we've designed all the touch points, physical and digital, that people interact with. And when we're at that type of project, we usually have a much more open-ended beginning where we're really trying to flesh out what something should be, opposed to getting a brand like, I don't know, say, let's just do Google again. They came to us and said, we want you to design X. They already have an established ethos. So it's more of how do we take that, spin it, and figure out how to apply it to the goal at hand with our take, opposed to there's literally nothing here. How do we start piecing together a story and make a brand out of thin air, basically?
You mentioned that you wanted, if you ever went in-house, you would like to have to work on something that is outdoors. What is it that you do, like in your personal life?
My personal life right now, I've been basically doing freelance work in all of my free time for the last 8 years to save up money to buy property. So I finally, during the pandemic, which was arguably the worst time to do this because everyone wanted land, so it was very hard to come by. But I bought 7 acres in upstate New York, and I'm building a series of structures on it. So right now, I bought it 2 months ago, so I go up there basically every weekend. And the house I'm living in right now, my girlfriend bought, and she bought this as a fixer-upper. So I help her fix this in the evenings or in the week, and then I do that on the weekends. And she comes up with me every few weekends as well. But basically, going up there and faking it till I make it as an architect and working on that project. And also my best friend from college is an architect, so we're doing it together. So like after this call, we're actually going to jump on our weekly brainstorm and work on our ideas together. So yeah, every weekend it's basically going up there and cutting down dead trees, clearing brush, moving rocks, and clearing up the site because I'm trying to do as much of it by hand by myself as possible, just because I like that and just because it's more economical.
Yeah, no, well, I mean, I think I would like to do it myself as well. It's just kind of like a big break from just being in the computer or in calls or anything the whole week, right? But
Yeah, it's a
what is
stark
it exactly
contrast.
that you're what? Sorry?
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just going to say, yeah, it's a stark contrast from being in front of a screen all day.
Yeah, definitely. And it just feels like now with the pandemic, it's more and more being in front of the computer. But anyway, that's another different conversation. But
True.
what is it that you're building over there? So you mentioned some structures, but what do you want to create over there? And congratulations, by the way, about this.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a journey. Working on, well, the architect I'm working with, his name is Sean Toomey. He's an architect in Atlanta, and we've been working on our vision statement for a while, which we took a little bit of a step back from because we realized we were approaching our fun project the same way we would at work, and we were just saying to ourselves, why are we making this work? Let's just figure it out. Let's just do a little bit more ad hoc opposed to being super structured about it. But the ultimate goal is some type of, it's like an adult fort built on daydreams of like all these ideas we've had as kids that inspire you to do more. So it's all about how do you allow yourself to still have all these fun and crazy ideas, but pursue them. So the property tiers 3 times up to this mountaintop. So at the bottom, right now I'm having this big windy driveway put in. We're gonna build a wood shop, and then the middle level is gonna be this big house up on stilts. So that way it's in the tree canopy. And then the top, I'm building this big stone drum tower that's just going to have a big roof on top and then a single room in the inside. So it's basically only built just to have dinner parties. So it'll have a small kitchen and a composting toilet and a big round table on the inside. And up these stone stairs will be this big deck with a fire pit. And up there you have a 180-degree view of the Catskill Mountains. So that's the tiered plan right now. And we're doing all of because of COVID, prices of construction materials are astronomical right now. You're in Mexico, correct?
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what it costs there, but a piece of plywood here is pushing $80 or $90, which is absurd. It should be $30, $35. So we've abandoned all wood construction, which is why we moved to a stone structure. We weren't actually planning on doing that. It was just something that we both like fantasy movies and medieval stuff. So we just said, hey, there's infinite stone here. Why don't we just use that? So now we're building a structure literally out of the mountain that it's sitting on. And that's what I've been spending my weekends doing, is going up there and hauling stones by foot up this mountainside and putting it into a pile and clearing out all this stuff. Because we found the top of the mountain is actually the bedrock. So spent the last 3 days straight camping by myself up there, peeling back all the dirt until we had a 30-foot by 30-foot circle of just stone. And the first 2 weeks of July, I have an army of friends, volunteers coming up, and they're going to help us build this thing. So yeah, we'll see. It's a little bit of a figure it out as we go, but that's the plan, is to have that finished by December or November before it gets too cold to work.
Wow. Oh, that sounds really incredible. If you need more volunteers, I'm up for it.
Yeah, anyone who wants to come. I can't give you much other than some beer in the evenings and some food. There's a brewery in town, which is a nice perk. But yeah, I'll be up there the entire time. I'm not sure what I'm going to look like after 2 weeks of living in the woods, but we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, well, like camping is my kind of plan. So,
Nice.
whoa, that's awesome, Reid. Well, I think we're getting to the end of this call. Is there anything else that you would like to talk about? I mean, one thing that I wanted to ask you is, do you have a specific design philosophy or an idea around, like thoughts around creativity that you would like to, share with the audience?
Well, one that I've been kind of hooked on recently, because I mentioned before I teach at Parsons, and I just wrapped up the semester for my second semester juniors. And in their critiques, I had one of my coworkers at Aruliden come in and speak and critique them. And something he kept saying was, simplify your gestures. And that's something that I've gotten very it's kind of stuck with me. It's the same thing as if you're going to geek out a little bit, if you're building splines, it's better to have the fewest number of points in there because it'll be a smoother spline. So the way I've always approached design is visually decluttering the world. That's kind of how I think about it a little bit. I'm the type of person that gets overwhelmed by things pretty quickly, and I like simplicity and I like quiet, and I like being around people, but not like massive numbers of people unless I have like at a party. I go to a party with 3 friends and talk to them the whole time opposed to being out in the whole party. And I see it the same way as design, where there's so much out there and so much to see and so much noise and bad design that at least the little thing I can try and do is make it a little bit simpler so everyone can understand it and it's easier to find. And when he said, what's it called? Simplify your gestures, I thought that was really good, where when I was trying to explain to my students how their designs could be better, it's difficult when you're teaching someone who's just starting to put those skills together, understanding what is good design. And not that I'm saying that my point of view here is the point of view, it is a point of view. But when they're putting it together, it's instead of having this part hit this part and then it curves over here, why can't you just smooth that out and simplify it? Like, what is this thing? Is it a product that sits on a podium? Is it a product that is a single material? Is it a single material so it highlights this one part line? Like, what is the thing that builds it up? And then once you have your gesture, then you can go in and have what's your first read, your second read, and your third read. And that's the way in which I've been kind of deconstructing design process for myself. That way I can do it for my students. And that's honestly one of the reasons why I like teaching so much, is because they ask these fundamental questions and then you have to step back as the professional and say, oh crap, why do I do it that way? Actually, that's a good question. And it's one of those things where you don't realize you're learning, but after doing it for now 4 years at Parsons, I realized that my students teach me more valuable lessons, are probably equal. I hope it's an equal exchange, basically, where what I'm teaching them is much more like, here's need right now, where they're teaching me things that kind of say, oh, here at the top level, like here's how it all kind of comes together and here's how it all kind of makes sense. So that long-winded explanation is simplify your gestures is what I've been very into recently in terms of creativity.
That's a really, really good advice and a really good way and a very simple way to putting it. I remember when I started studying, it was like you always wanted to add more things to it, and it does this, and then if you click this button, it opens this, like it just became this like crazy contraption, whereas in reality you want things to just do one thing well and then also be like less visually crazy. Well, thank you so much, Reid. It has been a pleasure talking to you and hearing everything about your journey and your philosophy and your like personal project.
Thank you so much. And like, we need to do this again where I interview you. I feel like I don't know much about your background at all. I'm sure it's very interesting since you're one of the founders of Gravity Sketch, correct? I'd love to hear that origin story.
Absolutely. I mean, we can do it at another time. We can reverse roles.
Sounds good. But yeah, so thank you so much for having me. It was fun to reminisce and talk a little bit. And like I said, talking to students, it's similar being on a podcast. You have to organize your thoughts and think it through and actually have a point of view. And that's something else that I think is good for students to start thinking about is clients will always ask you what's your point of view, and whether it's genuine or not, you always need to have an answer. So the earlier in your career you become comfortable with thinking that way, the more successful you'll probably be. And being on a podcast is a good way for you to have to force yourself to think about it live. So thank you for giving me that challenge for the last hour.
Oh, happy to do so.